Welcome back, everybody. Another edition here of Coach's Corner on the Auburn Undercover podcast. Nathan King here, joined as always by former Auburn defensive coordinator Ellis Johnson, our publisher Ronnie Sanders on as well. And Ellis, yet another game for Auburn where they let one slip late, and it's the second time in the last 3 games that they've let a double-digit lead slip away in the fourth quarter. Auburn loses 21-17 at Missouri. It felt like a couple plays there in the second half. Felt like somebody was going to make a play, and that may have been all it took to win the game. But turns out Auburn didn't do enough before Missouri's quarterback got back in the game, and obviously led them to a win in the fourth quarter. Ellis, I mean, this is now a team that, look, and Hugh Freeze talked about it on Monday. He said he feels like when the pressure gets on late in these games and they have opportunities, he said that he feels like they're playing timid. He feels like they're playing and coaching not to lose, instead of going out there and trying to step on the throat and win a game. And obviously that showed up on Saturday.
Yeah. Another game that they played at least 3/4 of the plays as well or better than the opponent. And this is supposed to be a top 20 opponent. Time will tell. But, the play I mentioned to y'all before we went on, it's first and goal on the 10, and they've got a lead in the fourth quarter, and the kid takes a sack for about 15 yards. I mean, it was just backbreaking. And then they completed the pass to catch some of the yardage back up, but as we all know, they ended up having to kick a long field goal that they missed. And it's like they're trying to figure out ways to lose a ball game. And I think he's exactly right. They seem to play tight or something when they get towards the end, and I guess maybe they don't have a lot of players that have been in tight games and won them. But boy, that play just sticks out of my mind. And of course, the last drive, if you take Missouri's last drive out of the statistics, Auburn's beat them all day long. But Brady Cook, who'd been pretty average the whole day, he comes through at the end. He plays under pressure and gets it done, whereas Thorne couldn't do it. But that's a backbreaker, guys. And mathematically, it's getting to where it's almost impossible to get a bowl game. So I know that particular loss, about to drive Hugh crazy, but I can't explain it other than the players do look like they just kind of make sure they don't make a mistake at the end of the game, and they end up not being able to make a key play to close it out.
Ellis, how come, or how much of it is coaching and how much of it is being, snake bit? I mean, you look at a team like Missouri, and Eli has done a great job managing games down the stretch. Has managed to win a bunch of close games. Auburn's managed to lose a bunch of close games, and sometimes, based on my experience, sometimes that's because that your team's young and they haven't come together, and sometimes it's just because you're making mistakes as a coaching staff, and what do you see there?
Well, it's hard to put your finger on. I mean, you'd have to be on the inside out to know if you've got those team leaders and if you got those guys that can play under pressure. If you look at these two teams, there's a huge difference in those two quarterbacks in the way they handle pressure and the way they handle tight situations. And it has been ever since each of them been playing. Brady Cook's a good player, but he's had some bad games this year. So, he's not a great player. But boy, when the pressure was on the other day and they had to have it, he got it done. And the pressure wasn't really on Auburn, in my opinion, when it's first and goal with a lead in the fourth quarter. And for some reason, they find a way to screw it up. And it's just like he doesn't have any game awareness or something. I mean, we can talk about the coaching, but I'm sure he hadn't been coached to take a damn sack on first and 10 at the 10-yard line when you got almost a double-digit lead almost. If you kick that field goal, I think you do have a double-digit lead. I mean, it's just he could have taken a knee 3 times, and the football team kicks a field goal, and they might win the game. So it's just unbelievable. They're sitting here right now. I think they're not far away from a lot of these other teams like Alabama and Georgia and some of them that are in the picture now for the conference title and in the playoffs. Auburn's like 45 in total defense nationally. I'm talking about 39 scoring defense. They're not giving up barely over 20 a game. They're 49 in turnover ratio, but total offense. And you say, well, that ain't real good. Well, Georgia's at 44 and Alabama's at 46. So, I mean, they're right there near them. But you look over there, and they are 126 out of 133 teams in turnover margin. So I don't know how you overcome that. You can get Pop Warner and Amos Alonzo Stagg to come out and talk to the team. If you're 126 out of 133 in turnover margin, you're not going to overcome that.
How much does, you remember the old term noise in the system? I know it's only year two, and nobody here thinks Hugh Freeze is getting fired. But there is some noise in the system, and there's complaining that's beginning to start. And, I know what he inherited. You guys know what he inherited. But as you point out, there've been a lot of games that they could have won. At what point does that start to affect your program? And then after that, I'd also like to get into your thoughts on the noise in the system that has already begun in Alabama, because you've experienced some of that.
Yeah. Well, it's like that everywhere. Everybody wants to say this place is different, that place is different, and it's worse with so much social media and so much contact that players have with different entities that you can't control. So how they handle that, if it's an indication of the way they're handling close ball games is the way they're going to handle the noise, and they can go ahead and forget it. But it's just part of college sports these days. It used to be only kind of in professional sports, but now, I mean, they're getting paid, and people think they can criticize them, and maybe rightly so. I think talking about the Auburn thing first, and you'd kind of look in the mirror. It's getting to be a pattern of this. And when you say he inherited a bad situation, and the guy in front of him inherited a bad situation, and the guy in front of him inherited a bad situation. And pretty soon, hell, they've had three interim coaches in a span of 20 years, I think, between 98 and 2020 or something like that. They had three interim coaches, meaning they fired the coach before the season was over. Very few places have done that. So I'm not saying that everything being done right now, but unless they don't want to be there, the best thing you can do right now to me is support Hugh Freeze, help him put the recruiting class together, because that's what's going to get you out of it. You're not going to come up with some new football plays or another fight song. You got to get some players, and he's on the way to one of the best recruiting classes they've had in many, many years. And everybody that wants to get in the noise factor, you just tearing that down too. So you better think about the future of your program, whether you want him to be the head coach or not. I don't think that's the problem.
Well, I agree with you, and I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, from my standpoint, yeah, he inherited a mess, but I think they pissed away some games. I don't think there's any question about that. But at the same point in time, I mean, the guy's been there a year and a half, and he had a good recruiting class last year. He's got a good recruiting class this year. Got a good recruiting class coming together for next year. I think at some point you've got to have some patience. I mean, I think Philip did a breakdown a couple of weeks ago. I think there are 47 freshmen on the team. Is that right, Nathan? I think I read that.
Freshmen or redshirt freshmen. Yeah.
So you got 47. You got one player. Jarquez Hunter is the only player left from his class. So you take in all the transfers plus the freshmen. I mean, you got a football team that hell they don't even know each other. I mean,
that's a very good point, and that's one reason they probably don't play well when it requires a lot of focus and intensity and poise. They don't have that experience yet. So I didn't realize that. I mean, that is a huge statement right there. So the best way forward, in my opinion, is leave it alone and don't. If you want to think you're impressing everybody by saying what's wrong with the program, hell, everybody can see what's wrong with it. So jumping on your soapbox and criticizing them every day, you're not helping the thing. You just want to watch a program like that the rest of your life, I guess.
Well, and you made a point about the interim coaches Auburn's had. Look at another traditional or another program that is usually pretty good, and the number of interim coaches they've had over the past 15 years in Florida. I mean, it's I mean, you talk about a disaster down there, and they're playing better with Billy right now the last couple of games. But I mean, you talk about a mess. I mean, with
Yeah. But I was on another little round robin, if you will, and the guy was a Florida guy, and I'm obviously partial to Steve Spurrier, but if you look through the history of Florida, you can't find but two times of extended continuous success for more than 3 to 4 years of good success. One was Urban Meyer and one Steve Spurrier. And every other time before that, they pop up and win something here or there. Florida does not have that tradition. I don't care what they say. Now they got the best recruiting demographics. They got all kind of money. They got a great fan base. They got all kind of things. I know uh, Jeff Rousey, one of our coaches at Alabama, who works for Coach Bryant, and he was on the plane with him down in Florida recruiting back in the '70s. And Coach Bryant made the statement to him then. He said, if this place ever wakes up, we're going to have hell on our hands. He was going down there taking all the best players, and he knew that if they ever got it going, that was going to be cut off. But even back then, a man like Coach Bryant could tell it. But if you look at it now, there's not been but two people who had extended success on a high level. And you know, I think sometimes they don't see the reality of it. So it's a good job, but it doesn't have a great history and everything to brag about and say this. We've done this all our lives. We're not going to put up with this. And I do think Billy's had a long time. I know him pretty good. He was actually quarterback at Furman when I was first head coach at the Center, but he's a good football coach and a good recruiter. And I can't figure out why he can't get it over the hump. There's so many examples like that. If you come in and the thing's a little off key, and supposedly now the locker room was a damn war zone when he walked in the door. We heard a lot of stuff about South Carolina. Y'all are going to beat them when they come in there this week, and I'd be sure, because Carolina was down. Sure enough, Florida comes up and plays like a bunch of scattered dogs, but they weren't even together, and South Carolina beat them. This was 4 or 5 years ago. Last year, Dan was there. We know Dan Mullen can coach. What the hell went off the tracks with him down there? I don't know. Sometimes, you look at it and say, well, maybe there's some element at the place that the good coaches can't even come in and handle it unless it's sitting there on a platter.
Well,
It's hard to explain. I mean, I don't know.
Well, and you and I've had this conversation. We probably talked about it on here too, but you're right. I mean, there have been two coaches that have had some success, some sustained success. Spurrier in particular, but if you look at Urban, I mean, the roster was stacked when he walked in. He comes in the first year and pisses away about 3 or 4 games, and really should have won. We felt like we were going to win the national championship the next year, which was his first year, and
Yes.
he does win one the next year, but then he starts bringing in the Aaron Hernandezes of the world, and before you know it, I mean, he runs out of our players and crashes and burns. Not to, but
Right. Well, I listened to Cam Newton on a podcast the other day. And he was describing some things down there, and you could tell he didn't want to tell everything. Of course, he's probably got a little sour grapes too, but it was about how he left there and how he ended up having an opportunity to come back to SEC and all this kind of thing. But there were some things that came out in that conversation that definitely verified that it was Halloween in that locker room. There was some crazy things going on. Unfortunately, they had a bunch of great players that were overcoming it.
Now, let's talk a little bit about you mentioned Peyton Thorne, and this was a game where some missed opportunities for them. He did have a throw in the end zone that Hugh Freeze lamented yesterday. I mean, it was right in the hands of one of their veteran receivers, and catch that ball, and it's 24-6. Now, you can't put it all in one play. They also, as we talked about before, they had a lot of they could have gotten off the field on a 95-yard touchdown drive. But, there is sort of a sentiment right now that, well, the season's lost, very little chance to go to a bowl game. Why continue to play a guy who's not even going to be here next year? And I have my opinions about that and how that's sort of a dangerous road to go down because, well, if you don't play Peyton Thorne, just don't play anybody else who's going to be here next year. And what kind of message does that send? But that's just my opinion. I guess just your thoughts on that situation now, Ellis, of a team that, a lot of your goals are pretty much gone. and you have some young talent on the team that hasn't played yet, how you sort of go about balancing that if you're a coach.
Yeah, I think basically you play the player that's got the best chance to win, and because you got other players on the team. If you kind of like what you just said, if you send the message, we know Peyton's a little bit better than this guy, but this guy's going to be here in the next 2 years. We got to start getting him ready, and the rest are going to be looking around. You're like, well, what the hell are we supposed to do? We're just part of a practice squad to help this kid over here. We want to win some games. So I think you got to be careful about that. Now, if he's not the leader in the locker room, and he's not, which I've heard he is, and he's a good player, good team player, and all that. And as long as he's doing that, I think you got to be careful. You blow the whole thing up. So I don't know enough about it to know exactly what's going on, but that's my opinion. And he makes some bonehead plays, but overall, he's not playing that bad. And that's what's probably so frustrating about it is, if you've got 65 plays and 55 of them are really great, good decisions, accurate balls, taking care of the football and all those kind of things. Then you have 3 or 4 plays that give the football team probably an opportunity to get beat. And those are the ones that just frustrate coaches, I'm sure. But no, I wouldn't pull him unless there's something going on off the field or anything else where they think we can't win with him.
Well, I agree with you. I think that you put the guy on the field that gives you the best chance to win. Even he may not be playing great, but he's not playing terrible at times. He makes boneheaded plays that cost you games, but if you don't have a guy behind him that is better than he is, then you don't have a lot of choices.
Yeah.
Let's talk about something that will that makes Auburn fans happy. Discuss Tuscaloosa.
My daddy went to Clemson. Hell, he'd get up on Sunday mornings or try to find out the score of the Carolina game before he did the Clemson games. He wanted to make sure they lost.
That's right.
I don't know, man. I tell you this one. Like I do 2 or 3 of these things. In fact, I'll do the radio on Thursday mornings up in 105 Tide or something, whatever it is, radio. And I mean, they're steaming up there, as you can imagine. And I've been on both sides of it. I mean, hell, first year we came in with Stallings. We lost the first 3 or 4 games. I can't even remember. And finally, we got to play Vanderbilt and won a game. But they wanted him there, and we hadn't been there for about 6 months. So at least nobody's house got rolled or no moving van showed up. But then we got it rolling and everything's great. And when I went to Clemson for 3 years, when I came back, they'd had the scholarship reductions with the NCAA issue or whatever. And our players still thought they were Alabama players, but they weren't practicing, the way they should. And we were getting beat by some average teams. And in a year or 2, we lost to Central Florida, we lost to Louisiana Tech, and we lost to somebody else I can't remember. And they were good teams for their teams. I mean, they were having great years that year. They had an offensive tackle at Louisiana Tech, and hell, he was better than the offensive tackle we had at Alabama. But that didn't sit well either. And of course, then it cost Mike and all the rest of us our jobs. So there's not going to be a whole lot of patience up there. But there again, I mean, if they start talking about making changes right now, they're just cutting their own throat. I don't look at their recruiting. I don't know what it is, but I'm sure it's solid, if not good.
Well, top
I
5.
tell you, but the main point I was trying to make is I don't know what's going on every day on the practice field, but when they play, they do not look like a well disciplined team. They're doing some stupid stuff. I guess the best example I can think of is like the other day they had a drive going, and some kid gets a 15-yard penalty and killed the drive. And it may be a drive that's going to, flip the score. And they're doing things like that. And I mean, I don't understand it. And then things where, like happened, it was something else where they didn't get in a little scuffle or something, some team or whatever. Anyhow, if it's going on the game field, then it's gone on Tuesday and Wednesday somewhere along the line. And that's where I'm wondering, is it being cut off? Is it being stopped? Now, their defense, they'll be dynamic for 20 minutes, then they'll give up some plays that look worse than the junior high. And it's either busts or it's discipline. And it didn't just start with losing to Tennessee or losing to Vanderbilt. This started the second half of the Georgia game when they got out front of Georgia, and gave them 2 or 3 haymakers and thought they were going to run them off the field. Georgia, obviously, now we know has a little grit to them, and they fought, and they weren't going to leave. And they should have won the ball game at the end, but Alabama pulled one out, again with a long pass. So they're not playing good football right now. They're making good football plays because they got some athletes in some spots that nobody has. But they're not playing good football, and they don't look focused when they play a game. There's all too much crap going on between the plays, and there's too much stuff going on the field. And to me, they don't look like an Alabama football team.
Well, I know a couple of coaches over there. One in particular that I've known for quite a while, and I told him when he took the job, I said, just understand what you're walking into. And I sent him a text after the Vanderbilt game. I said, "You having fun yet?" He said, "Oh yeah." He said, "Just I thank God my kids aren't here." he said, I sent him a text after the Tennessee game, and he said, "Just wait till you lose to Auburn, or something." Then it gets, it's going to be interesting to watch there. I mean, not having.
Oh.
I mean, they won 10 games, 16 straight seasons, and I remember the Dubose days and the Mike Shula days, and I started thinking, I mean, shoot, people that are under 30, they don't remember those days.
That's right. That's exactly right. I mean, and just one thing about people that have never worked there, know I've been around it a little bit. Like I never worked there, but I'd coached against them a little bit, and I'd been around the Southeast my whole career. I understood Alabama when I went in. Now I didn't know everything, but I think sometimes people come in and work at places, and you constantly talk about the previous guy, Auburn. They're just as good as coaches. But I think sometimes when all the stuff starts, they don't listen to it because they've never heard it before and they don't know it means anything. But what they don't realize is a lot of those people out there mean a lot. And there's a bunch of complaining going on. There's some plotting and paying and everything else going on. And they're powerful people when they all get their mind set on something and they decide they're going to make a change. They make a change. You might think they're just complaining on the radio or, or talking out of place or whatever, but it's a cult. And they just really, I mean, if they get upset about it, you think it's funny sometime, but they're that upset. Well, it ain't gonna be funny 3 weeks later.
No, you're 100% right. And I just again, for Auburn people on our message board, and this is Nathan, bear with us. This is my entertainment this morning. You should see the reactions on our message board. Go read the Alabama message boards. I mean, it's really, I think that's the only thing that's keeping a lot of Auburn people from jumping is you post a link to the Alabama message boards and they go over there and read it, and it makes their day. It's going to be interesting to see how, as you point out, I mean, well, that staff, they're not from here. They're from the West Coast, they're from here, they're from there. You walk in, you put your family in a situation like that, and your kids start getting yelled at when they walk through the schools every day. It's all of a sudden, it's not a joke anymore. It becomes real when you're living it.
Oh yeah, and I maybe I was lucky. I never was married with children when I worked there, but yeah, I've seen it the best of the best, and when it got really bad, and most of the really top people, you didn't hear them either time. They might have been making their decisions, but you didn't hear them any time. But some of the folks that you constantly were running into, I mean, it just was their life, and you kind of after you were there understood how serious it was to them. But it's and getting beat at Tennessee, I picked that game, and I picked Tennessee to win that game. The Vanderbilt thing. I mean, it can happen to people, but they got too many good athletes on that team to let it get to that situation. And they're a legit football team, man. I mean, They really are this year. Little quarterbacks come in, they run in the system he ran, and they're a headache, man. As we've seen, I mean, they weren't about to think they beat Kentucky, or maybe they beat them at home, but they've messed up some people's seasons, and they are a decent football team this year. I've seen Vanderbilt before, where you better be ready to play, or they're gonna beat you. And but Alabama right now, with what they've got on that field, should not have been in that situation, and they got out coached and out prepared or whatever that day. Uh, and that's the one. But you saw it coming the week before. I mean, they beat Georgia, and you'd have thought that they run them off the field. And they were very fortunate at the end of the game to get out of there alive. And it was their own fault. I mean, Georgia showed a lot of courage coming back, a lot of fight. But again, if you're playing and doing what you're supposed to do, and you're focused on your assignments and not doing things between plays and all this other crap, you don't lose that kind of lead with the athletes you got on that field.
The funniest part about this whole thing, and I think Alabama fans, coming back down to earth a little bit, of joining the rest of us of not having the greatest dynasty in the history of the sport anymore. The funniest thing about a relative meltdown for them is they beat LSU this year in Baton Rouge, and they're 10-2 in a playoff team because they have the best win in the country over Georgia. So there is all of this, and because you look at the rest of their schedule, I don't think they're losing Missouri at home. They probably are not losing to Auburn at home, and they play Oklahoma on the road, who's got insane struggles right now. And so they could.
Yeah, they're not
but
good.
the LSU game really sticks out, and I don't know. The 10-2 and a win over Georgia, to me, gets this team in the playoff, because Georgia could end up being. I mean, we can talk about them in a minute, but they could end up being the best team in the country.
Yeah, they could. I think, obviously, like you say, they've got to beat Missouri, and then the way they're playing now, they might not. And that road game at LSU is huge. And I wouldn't have said that 7 weeks ago, but LSU right now is playing as good as anybody in the conference.
Yep.
Nussmeier, I mean, he's a winner. He's better than I thought he was. And the defense has steadily gotten better and better and better. And they're playing good defense right now. I don't know what was wrong with them early in the year, but they weren't a quality defense. So that's going to be a tough game. And if they don't play with more poise than they've been playing with, more maturity, they won't handle that environment down there. But you may be right. I think it's going to get real political on that 12-team playoff, and I think if they start letting SEC teams in there with two wins, it's going to get nasty. Now 13 and 14 is going to be just as pissed as 5 and 6 were 2 years ago. It ain't going to change anything.
Ellis, tell me what the hell's going on at Florida State.
Ronnie, I think it's an example of too much portal. Now you can look over at Vanderbilt, and somebody said they took 52 this year, and they look like a disciplined football team. Georgia didn't. They don't get into it big time, but they had some key players they had to bring in this year. And of course, Dabo does like to take them out of the portal. He has occasionally, but it'd be like a unusual thing where he's got to have a third quarterback, and he's not going to go out and try to compete for a top one because he's got a great one there, but he's gone in another year, whatever. And he has brought some transfers, but it wasn't like he was out working the portal. And I know for a fact that they've researched it and tried a few, but City always comes back to the fact that I'm either going to pay this portal guy what he's asking for, or I'll just give my kid who's a number 2 backup who's making his improvements in all season, I'll give him that money and keep him here. And that's what he chose to do. So they play the opening game, and all the sports writers want to talk about is you can't win that way anymore because they got their butt kicked 34-0. Well, they got their butt kicked because it was Georgia, and they weren't ready to play. It wouldn't have anything to do with the portal. Now, Clemson was supposed to be number 2 to Florida State this year in the conference because Florida State lost all those NFL guys, and a bunch of them didn't even play in the bowl. So they go get them a bunch of portal. And before they get to the season, their roster is much better than Clemson's. And all of a sudden, by the time they play, Florida State's lucky to stay on the field with them. So every time you can come up with an example of why the portal is not good, somebody will come up with a reason that it works. And so, Dion apparently has gotten over the hump, and now he's got some stability in his program. They're winning, and he did it with the portal. But I think if you don't base your program on recruiting and keeping some people there, I think you get into this what we talked about earlier, where you got kids that don't know each other, kids that don't know the coaches, kids that don't know how things are done around here. Just the what we expect you to do about going to class, about being on time to meetings, about how we go from drill to drill on the field, how we approach this, how we approach Fridays. I ain't putting up with cell phones in meetings. I'm not going to have them on the bus. I'm not, whatever it is. When you bring in 50 new faces from high school and portal, I just think that's a hard job. They don't even do that in the NFL, and I just think I think there's evidence of it, and it kind of depends on the type of kids you brought in too. But I don't have any doubt that Norvell's a good coach, and he's not have a bunch of outlaws. You can't research his history where he's been. He's never had that kind of problem, so there's no history of that. He's got a bunch done that right now, and they'll play hard until they see they're not going to win. And then they just punching the clock, picking up the check.
Well, and that's what you end up with, I think, with when you go 1 year from going undefeated and potentially having a chance to play for a national championship, and now you look like they do. You hit in the portal last year, and you missed this year or something. I mean, something is way.
That's my thing. I don't think anything's falling apart with their discipline and their procedures. I mean, it's the same way he's done it everywhere he's been, and he did it the previous year. Should have been in the 14 playoff.
Who from the conference makes the playoff?
Well, mathematically, what is it? Mathematically, there's 6 teams right now, 7 that could still win the thing, including Vanderbilt.
Yeah.
Realistically, I think there are 5 teams that have a legit shot to win out and win the title, SEC. Getting into playoffs, the problem is, they're all beating up on each other now. And when you get teams like Alabama with 2 losses, and I think Tennessee going to probably get beat at Georgia, and they're going to have 2 losses. And then, I'm not sure Georgia, they got murderer's row to finish up. If they can get through without another loss, there's a lot of things going on right now. To try to give you a number on that, I couldn't begin. I would say there's going to end up being 3, possibly 4. And I think some of it's going to be political. They're not going to let any more in. But they'll have an excuse because a lot of them will have that second loss, and they'll point to something. It's like if Alabama, like Nathan, like you say, if they sitting there in that situation, they'll be bragging about that LSU win, and everybody will be saying, "Yeah, but that damn Vanderbilt performance, we don't need any of that over here. So y'all can come back next year." I don't know. I just think there's going to be a lot of political pressure not to put too many of them in.
What are your thoughts on the coast to coast Big Ten?
So far, so good, because they took some good teams from over there.
Yeah.
What Oregon's doing right now, but on the other hand, Southern Cal is a two touchdown underdog for Rutgers, according to the bookies. If they get their butt kicked at home by Rutgers, oh my goodness, he might be looking for a job. He had one decent season, and it was early on, and it wasn't that great. It was just good for what they'd been going through. So anyhow, that's an example. The one I don't think is working well, and I think it's they're going to feel more and more effects, is the ACC, and they took those guys over there just because they had a brand name. They don't bring anybody to the stadium. I would seriously doubt that somebody in California is cutting on ACC football just because Stanford's playing or Cal's playing. Now, Cal's been competitive. They just snake bit. I mean, the Auburn game they had, that's the one time where they've been able to close it. And they've had 2 or 3 more like that where they just couldn't quite win. But they've been competitive. Stanford's been less competitive. And what's going to start to hurt these teams when they travel over there to play, and then they got to come back, and the effect on the travel, I think, is going to be sometimes it affects these pros. I can't imagine it's not going to affect college teams, coaches and players a little bit in their preparation. And I think it's going to, affect the game after more than the game out there. And I think that's hurting these West Coast teams because they're having to come over here 3 or 4 times a year. I think they've got it to where a team like Clemson goes out there uh, once every other year, maybe, or something like that. So SMU has done a good job. I've read last year. I mean, they could sneak in and be in the playoffs for the conference title. They're playing really well right now, and they only got one loss. So that way, but I don't think it's going to help the ACC in the long run. The Big Ten thing, I don't like it because I don't like the footprint. But they got great teams from out there, and it's probably been a bonus, I guess.
I think there's certainly been the intersectional. Well, I guess they're interconference matchups now, but it's it's so far. I think you're right. I'm
I
not
tell you
sure.
what's helped the Big Ten this year is Rutgers and Indiana. I mean, when you got teams like that, they've always been just doormats. Boy, I tell you, you don't want to play those guys right now.
They've done a tremendous job at Indiana. Well, Rutgers too, but Indiana in particular. I mean,
Yeah.
and you look at what you look at the job Shiano did the first time, and then what he's doing now, and look at what that program was before. I mean, that guy's a pretty good coach.
Yep. And I don't know if they've kind of taken a different philosophy and he's got them to put some bucks in it and some money or whatever. But those people up there are not college fans, and they're never going to be. They're pro fans. So I don't think you're ever going to become a 70,000, 80,000 draw. You just can't get people up there to be interested in college football. Uh, but he has done a heck of a job. And apparently they've got a good NIL because I think their players. I mean, I look at them and say, well, they're playing with Big Ten players. They may not have the talent that Oregon's got or that Ohio State's got, or some of those guys, but they got better players in Michigan right now. So I think that they're very competitive. In Indiana, he took a bunch of his James Madison kids with him, and supposedly just their work habit and their way of coming in and kind of bringing that philosophy with them. Signetti's kind of got that program in his gear already. And they said those 25 kids he brought from James Madison were a big part of that. And not necessarily on the field, but a lot of it's just in the work habits and the practice field and the locker room and just the environment, the team atmosphere and so forth. I heard somebody talking about the other day, the tremendous amount of credit that's what's changed the program so fast.
Well, I don't know if Sal Sinceri's son Tino is the quarterback's coach up there, and I've been really impressed with him. Talked to him, and they it's impressive what they've done up there. I know the AD at Indiana a little bit too, and it's I mean that he deserves a lot of credit. That's a hard job.
Yeah, absolutely. They got resources, but it's a lot like Chapel Hill. Just first of all, you got to be number one on your own campus, and it's impossible. And then you got to find your way up through the Big Ten, which is one of the better conferences. I think it's top loaded. I don't think it's as deep as the SEC. But you take the first 5 teams in the Big Ten, they're just as good as anybody else's first 5. And they're up there in the middle of them now. And even with some guys like Illinois, they're playing good. And so there's some other things. It's going to be a tough league, man. When they get it, I like the guy at Wisconsin. I think's a hell of a football coach, and they got their butt kicked by Alabama early, but they sneakily right now. I think either 4-2 or 5-2, so they're not a bad football team. But it's tough. Wasn't it Indiana? Didn't they beat Nebraska last game?
Indiana beat the living hell out of Nebraska.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean that 20 years ago that was complete reversal. They were a practice game for Nebraska, and Nebraska's not bad this year, but they beat them legit and kicked their butts.
Mm-hmm. What do you think about? Well, I like to talk about the coaching stuff, but I mean, you look at Brett Bielema, had success at Wisconsin, was a disaster at Arkansas. He's back in the Big Ten and did a really good job with Illinois. And I wonder a little bit. We talked about UNC. What's going to happen with Mac Brown? I mean, because it looks like.
Yeah, I'd be shocked if he doesn't go ahead and retire. I mean, I'm just guessing. I don't have any inside scoop, but they're a touchdown underdog again this week to Virginia. And if they lose to them, I don't see how they have a winning record. Uh, and they're not playing good football. And it's been kind of a mystery. The first 2, 3 games, their defense was really good. And then all of a sudden, they come in. James Madison just scorches them. Or something, wasn't it James Madison put 70 on them?
I think it was.
Yep.
I mean, a 1AA team at your home field scored 70 points. And defensively, they had played well. And then they haven't been able to recover from that. Offensively, they've been really productive, but they make some critical turnovers at the wrong time. You know, they moved the football and they've scored some points in games, but they're very inconsistent too. They're not taking care of football.
Well, our friend Freddie is up there at North Carolina as a tight end.
Yep.
And I sent him a text after that game. I said, "What in the hell are y'all doing? What is going on?" He said, "Our defense could not get them off the field." He said, "I have all the years I've been doing this." He said, "I have never seen anything like it."
And they had, up until that time, they had been playing very solid. They were good.
Ellis, what do you make of we can close out here, I guess. This weekend's game, a couple teams in Auburn and Kentucky that really, really would like a win. Kentucky has sort of been mystifying how inconsistent they've been. Obviously, that win at Ole Miss seemed massive, and then since then you lose at home to Vanderbilt, which is not as bad as it usually sounds, and then just get dogged on the road by Florida in a rivalry that's been very competitive late. This is the last SEC home game of the year for Kentucky. This is one where they are really going to feel like they need it on their home field. But on the other side, Auburn's probably feeling like, as strange as it sounds, this is one of the lesser opponents that they've played in the past several weeks.
Yep, I'd almost put the same thing down. They only got 3 wins right now, and they're looking at Auburn, Tennessee, Murray, Texas, Louisville. Auburn, they probably think is one of their bold wins. And but at the same time, the last 2 times it was Vandy, and then was it, Florida? Both of them have beaten Kentucky at their own game. What I mean by that, they've had less penalty yardage, and they beat them in the turnover margin. So that's 2 weeks in a row, and that's the way Stoops wins. They beat Ole Miss the other day, and Lane ran under 60 snaps. So his formula, he's gotten beaten by 2. I'd say Vandy's a good team. They're not average, but Florida's not a good Florida team. So all these SEC teams are good. I mean, hell, that's a given, but they're not great. And they have beaten Kentucky back to back now at their own game. So if Auburn can just quit what we've been talking about, quit making these critical mistakes at key times, they can beat Kentucky. I mean, they ought to have 5 wins now at least, and they don't. But it's because to me, it's their own fault, and they just got to figure out a way. That's the only thing I can say. I think they got to spread under 3 points, and they are at Kentucky, so that's going to make it a little bit tougher. But that's all I can say. They're good enough, and they play well enough, and they got enough players, and if they can just quit beating themselves, they can beat Kentucky. What I predicted, I can't predict anything on those 2 teams right now.
Before we go, let's get your thoughts on the rest of the conference real quick. LSU at A&M.
That's the biggest one of the week, and I've been saying for a couple 3 weeks, A&M is sneaky coming in the back door, and they've got some hard ones to go, but they got them all at Texas A&M at home, and I see where the bookies even give them a couple of points favorite against LSU. I think LSU is a little bit better than them. I thought Texas A&M caught in fire with the quarterback coming back 2 weeks ago. They started getting balance in the offense, and they boat raced somebody. I can't remember who it was. Then all of a sudden, they didn't really separate from Mississippi State the way I thought they would. And State's getting better, but they're not good. I mean, they're one of the worst teams in the conference. But they didn't really run away from them, and I thought they would. So we'll see. I think LSU is the most improved team, and Texas A&M right now has got a really good track, and I think they're playing good football. That's going to be the best game of the week or most critical game of the week in the conference picture, I think.
Oklahoma at Ole Miss.
Oklahoma's in trouble. And they're just, a lot of people had these problems with the young quarterbacks, and they've switched back and forth now, and that's always a bad formula, just like Auburn. If you ever leave one and go to the young guy, and you have to come back 2 weeks later, you probably already took his confidence away. Now you're gonna give him the ball back, and it's never good when you have to do that. South Carolina's got a good defense. They're kind of hit or miss, but they are a really dangerous defense. And so I predicted that upset too, but I didn't know they'd go out there and do that. And they turned over the ball three times in the first quarter, and every one of them, two of them went for six, and the third one set up for six. And then South Carolina's offense scored one touchdown the whole game and had under 300 yards. I mean, you look at their statistics and you say, how the hell did they win this game in the SEC on the road? But they were +4 in turnovers. They didn't turn the ball over, and Oklahoma was just a hard show. Unless they just all of a sudden find some miracle, Ole Miss might beat them 40 or 50 points.
Arkansas, Mississippi State.
Arkansas, I think they're just playing too consistent right now. That's that loss.
Missouri at Alabama.
I think Alabama recovers, but I think it'll probably be ugly, but they'll win.
And what if they don't?
Oh, I think that's, who knows? It'll get so bad over there, and they like you said, they ain't gonna make a change right now. But it's two similar situations. The louder it gets, I mean, it just becomes self-destructive, but it ain't gonna make any difference. I think Missouri. I think Eli's done a really, really good job.
I do.
But they were preseason ranked high, or I don't think they'd still be up there where they are. They're just not quite there. Luther Burden, if you can somehow get him corralled, the rest of their offense is pretty average. Even Cook, he had a good finish the other against Auburn, but he's not played that well in 3 weeks. And then defensively, they're legit, but a couple of teams have finally kind of physically gotten at them a little bit, and they're not as dominant as they were early in the season. So I think they'll finish out with a couple of 3 more losses.
And we got Texas, or Vandy hosting Texas in a showdown.
Yeah, that one. I mean, let's say they got a hangover, I think they'll go up there and beat them pretty handily. But Vanderbilt's legit this year. I don't think they'll get embarrassed, but Texas will go up there and win by 14 or 20. I don't know what's wrong with that. The quarterback from Tennessee is the biggest mystery in the conference to me right now. They winning on defense and running the football. Mm-hmm. And not to jump around, but that's been one of the biggest surprises this year to me. Is they're not very explosive on offense, but their defense is legit.
They are, and the quarterback shows signs. I mean, he sometimes he'll throw a pass, you're like, goodness, and then the next play.
I go it's the talent, but I guess it's the youth. I don't know.
I think Heupel has done one of the most admirable jobs in the league the past few years, but this year especially because of, like you said, so much anticipation around the quarterback, and they knew they were going to have a good running back too. But he has shifted, saying, "All right, going to win running the ball in defense. You don't try to force something you don't have." And like Ronnie said, he's got a high ceiling as a player. Iamaliava does, but I mean that's how they beat Alabama. They beat them by run. I think they ran for 220 and played defense.
In my opinion, that game, the two teams had to overcome their quarterbacks, and the defenses, will hold them in there for a little while. But anyhow, he's done a great job because he was hired because of his offensive background, and he comes in with that philosophy. And offense immediately explodes, and he caught a quarterback who wasn't that highly rated, but boy, he just did a great job. He was so accurate, and he's lighting it up. And they're hanging around on defense, but what they were doing, they were recruiting on the defensive side of the ball quietly, I guess. And these last 2 years now, that defense is really good. And I think Banks does a hell of a job too. I think everything they do, their pressure system and the way they defend teams, and I think they got a chance now to win out, and maybe be right in the title picture. But their toughies don't have to go to Georgia. Tennessee, don't they go to Georgia?
I believe
Yes.
Not this week, but I think they got to play at Georgia, and that's going to be but it ain't gonna surprise me if they go down there and beat Georgia.
Let me look up their schedule real quick. I think
That's they do have to. I mean, they got to go to Vandy too at the end of the year, which is not a cakewalk anymore.
No,
I mean, you got Kentucky next week, Mississippi State at Georgia, UTEP, and at Vandy. So really, you look at it, you get past Georgia.
Well, that Tennessee Georgia game is going to be huge because one of them's going to play for the title, I think, and one of them's going to get bumped out.
Well, we appreciate you being with us again.